I'm a female, and the story took place 3 years ago, when I was 16. When I was in high school, I babysat on the odd occasion for a family I'd known since I was pretty young. They were great, really laid back, and it was the easiest babysitting job in the world, because the kids would usually be in bed before I got there, and always slept really well. It had been about a year since I babysat for them. At that time, they had a new baby, who was about 6 months old, so on this occasion it was me, the baby, and the 3 little kids. I should really mention before anything that their house was completely amazing. It wasn't the flashiest from the outside, but it was huge, and although it was in a suburban street, it was positioned on a hill, so from the master bedroom upstairs, you could look out over the whole city. They had tons of cities, which back then was really exciting for me. The kitchen was always full, and the whole place was decorated like an amazing art gallery, brilliantly designed and very spacious. They always had interesting stuff around too. That night, I noticed in the front room, among the kids' stuff, that there was a fake samurai sword. I remember laughing at it, thinking it looked too real to be a toy, and I waved it around a bit. It didn't surprise me though. They were really interesting people, and I always found unordinary things that I liked. The layout of the house was cool too. The front of door opened almost directly into the living room, and off to the side, there was a giant spiral staircase leading upstairs to the bedrooms. The living room was fantastic, with tall windows overlooking the front garden, and almost the entire street. The middle part of the house is completely open plan, with the kitchen and dining room spread out for what seemed like miles. Near the back of the house, they even had a small study room, which was more like a reading nook. From memory, it was just an armchair and 2 walls of books. My parents dropped me off around 8:30, and the mom and dad left soon after, telling me the kids were fast asleep and that if I had any problems with the baby, I could wake their oldest daughter, who was good at settling him and would help me if I needed it. I remember being comforted by that, because I knew virtually nothing about babies. I didn't need to, in the end, because the kids slept fine. But the important thing is that I felt safe at ease. They told me they would be back around 1 a.m. and to call if I needed anything. I wasn't worried. I'd done this countless times before, and even though it was a cold night with a harsh wind, I knew this house, and I knew nothing would happen. I felt completely at home. I felt so safe actually, that when I had trouble locking the screen door after they'd gone, I didn't stress too much about it. I thought maybe it was jammed. I didn't have a key to the front door, and usually the screen door shut just fine. They lived in a good neighborhood though, and it didn't occur to me at the time that it was anything to worry about. I quickly forgot about it and went to the study room to read. After quickly picking in on the kids, I lost track of time for a while. I didn't have a phone when I was 16, and there was no clock in the reading nook. I was totally lost on a book, and before I knew it, a couple hours had gone by. But the passing of time was not what woke me from my reading stupor. I'd been deep in the book, but the eerie sounds of the gusting wind made a howling noise and drew my attention away from the book. I don't know why, but the noises gave me an unsettling feeling in my stomach, and I became a little paranoid. I thought, as I stared at the books on the walls, that maybe I'd just been settling too long. So I got up and slowly wandered into the kitchen with the intent of checking on the kids and then maybe watching some TV. The front living room was in darkness, and as I stepped into it on my way to the bedrooms, something stopped me dead in my tracks. With the light of the kitchen illuminating me from behind, I stood paralyzed by the sight of a man standing in the front garden. He didn't move and I didn't either. I could see that he had shut the garden gate behind him, and from his position in the garden, it was clear he'd been walking towards the door. The same front door I couldn't get locked. I didn't know what to do, as the immediate terror overwhelmed me. I had no weapon. The door was unlocked and I couldn't run, because the kids were sleeping upstairs. He was huge and I was small. He had a perfectly visible view of me, as a shadowy outline watched from the darkness, dressed in all black. I've never seen anything more terrifying in my life. I knew if I didn't do something, he would come inside and get us. Then out of the corner of my eye, I spotted the fake samurai sword and very slowly, bending down slightly, but not taking my eyes off of the figure in the garden. I picked it up and raised it in the air, letting him know I was armed. I don't know why, but I couldn't think of anything else. He stood there perfectly still, until they started walking right up to the screen door. My entire body was shaking, but I tried so hard to remain calm on the outside. Even though every part of me wanted to scream and run, he had this blank, cold stare in his face, almost like a robot. I didn't think he blinked once, as I watched his eyes staring dead center at me. This standoff felt like it lasted forever. Eventually, he turned and slowly walked towards the gate and walked away down the street. I stood there for a long time, watching him walk away, and then I ran to the front door and leaned against it, forcing it shut. I was 16. I was stupid, because I never called anyone. I didn't even mention anything when my parents came to pick me up. I never told anyone. I thought everyone would blame me for putting the kids in danger, or a guy would somehow find out and come after me. The family today is fine and nothing ever happened to them or their house after that night. But I always have been thankful for that moment of intense dread that caused me to leave this study, because if I hadn't, I don't even let myself think of how differently that night would have gone. This happened a while ago when I was 17. My girlfriend, who was 16 at the time, was asked if we could babysit for her mom's friend. Since money was involved and we were broke, we obviously took the job. We went to the house at 2 p.m. For the first few hours, everything was going fine and we were all just hanging out watching TV. The owners told us they'd be home sometimes later in the evening, so we were thinking sometimes around 8 or 9. However, a few more hours passed and it was now around 1 a.m. and they still weren't home. My girlfriend messaged them, asking what time they'd be home, but they never replied. So we thought to ourselves that they were out drinking and would hopefully be back soon. Prior to taking this babysitting job, the homeowners warned us that we were in a high-crime neighborhood, so they cautioned us to keep the doors locked all the times. Now that it was really starting to get late, and we weren't the best area, we were getting more and more agitated that they hadn't returned home yet. Around 1 a.m. I heard a noise outside. I turned to my girlfriend who was on her phone and asked if she heard it.
No, you're just hearing things.
And I brushed it off. Around 10 minutes later, I was bombarded with glass. A brick had flown straight through the window, landing on the sofa next to me, just a couple feet away. Now having an adrenaline rush and not wanting to look weak in front of my girlfriend, I went outside to see if I could find the person who did it, but nobody was there, or so I thought. On the left-hand side of the house, there was an alleyway leading into both the back garden of the house and the neighboring house. It was pitch black, but being the brave person I thought I was, I turned on the flashlight on my phone to look down at it. As I did, I almost peed my pants. I saw someone in a black hoodie crouched down in the alleyway. We stood there, frozen, staring at each other for what felt like an eternity, before he finally threw himself towards me at full speed. I said to myself,
Hell no,
and ran into the house, locking the door behind me, as my entire body was shaking. When I got back in, the kids were already downstairs wondering what happened, and my girlfriend was there to comfort all three, telling them it was nothing, even though they were old enough to probably note what happened if we explained it to them. She started to clean up the mess while I was on the phone to the police, fearing that the person was still waiting outside. The police came within minutes, took down our information and told us that they would patrol the area, adding that they'd keep an eye on the house until the morning. About an hour later, the police knocked on the door again and gestured me to follow him to his patrol car. When I got the car, I saw a man sitting in the back seat, hands cuffed. That was when the cop asked,
is this the person who smashed the window?
I analyzed the person from head to toe, and he fit the description I gave to the police entirely. The parents finally got home, and they were obviously worried about their children's safety. However, they didn't seem surprised at all to hear of this happening. Instead, they thanked us, paid us, and we went on our way home sometimes around 4 a.m. A few days passed until I found out more about that night. It turns out that was the mother's crazy ex, who had full intentions of killing her. When he was taken into custody, they found a knife in his pocket. I still get chills when I think about that night. If I had tried to be brave and fight that guy, I would definitely be dead or seriously injured. This story is told from the perspective of a 15-year-old girl. I had started babysitting a family with 3 kids, 2 boys, 1 girl. Their mom knew me as the oldest kid was friends with my little brother. and had asked my mom if I could help out, just because she had started taking on more shifts and her husband was doing the same. They lived right next to my high school and paid well. So I agreed despite not having that much experience. Pretty quickly I realized it was going to be difficult. The kids were great, but I was nervous around them. The oldest was fine. He just played on his Xbox most of the time or did homework. But the two youngest were a different story. The middle child, the daughter, was completely obsessed with horror movies. And on one occasion I had to hide the knives from her since she wanted to reenact them, and the youngest son tried to set fire to the Christmas tree. I know what kids can be like since I have a lot of younger and older cousins, but these ones drove me insane and I would constantly worry about them hurting themselves or each other. If they acted up, I would threaten to call their mom, which would normally work. It was after a few months that I realized that if I mentioned their dad, they would just behave immediately. So that's what I started doing. Now I had never really met the dad. I just knew that the guy was really tall and big built, but was described to me as still being really nice. So I never thought about it. On one occasion, I had said to the youngest boy that I would call his dad if he didn't stop behaving, which resulted in a huge tantrum. So I ended up calling him and explaining. Luckily for me, the dad was getting off work early, so he said he would come home as quick as he could and apologized for his kids' behavior. When I told the kids this, he started sobbing and ended up locking himself in his room. Later that day, when the dad got home, I found out they weren't joking when they said he was tall. I'm only 5'3" and was 15 years old, and when I saw him having to crouch a little to get through the door because of his size, I remember thinking it was no wonder the kids wouldn't misbehave when he was there. I said hi and apologized for the work call, but he brushed it off and said that it needed to be done, not to worry. Not at this stage, the two youngest had went outside to play, while I was in with the oldest and we were tidying up a little from dinner. The dad asked the oldest to go to the shop and leave, and that's when things started to get pretty weird. The oldest started to get pretty antsy when he was asked to go to the shop and kept making excuses as to why he couldn't go. I could see the dad getting visibly frustrated, and I wanted to defuse the situation, so I offered to go on his stead. Now I would like to point out that everything seemed normal at this point, but I remember feeling really intimidated by the dad. I had only met him this one time, and spoke for no more than 20 minutes. Later, I found that the oldest had said to his mom that he didn't want me left alone with his dad, as he had apparently been watching me a little too closely during our short encounter. After the day was over, the parents had asked me to babysit later on the week, which I agreed. However, a few days later, that quickly changed. I got a text from the mom apologizing for last-minute changes, but she said I couldn't babysit. I was a little agitated since I changed plans, but wasn't too bothered and just said it was fine and told her to let me know when she needs me. She asked me to come around and get my pay for the last 2 weeks, and I decided to stop by before going home. As soon as I was in the house, I could tell something was off, but I didn't want to pry. I just went in, said hi, talked about books for a little bit, and then left. It wasn't until the next week when I would find out what happened. A week later, I came home to my mom being very upset and angry, pacing the living room while my stepdad was trying to calm her down. I immediately asked her what was wrong, feeling a little worried. Instantly, she just threw her arms around me and started crying and holding me. I was meant to be babysitting that day, but again I got cancelled on, so I was home earlier than what I had originally said. Pulling away confused, I asked her what was wrong again. It turned out my mom had been trying to get a hold of me, but my phone had died. I had went to babysit. No one was home, so I just decided to head back on the bus and wasn't able to let my mom know. She sat me down and started trying to ask me questions about the dad and my time babysitting. Confused, I mentioned that I had only met him once and only really spoke to him on the phone a handful of times when the kids were acting up. Nodding, my mom started pressing on and asked if anything else had happened and kept questioning me, saying that I could tell her anything. I just looked at her confused and told her that nothing happened and asked what this was all about. She said with relief and took a deep breath before letting me know what happened. Now I'm going to keep the details vague because this was on my local news and I don't want to get doxxed. But it turns out, the dad had killed someone while working and had been taken by the police. During interrogation, it turned out that he admitted to beating his wife, and there was speculation of assaults, and there was also mentions of one of his types, which matched my exact description at the time. And my mom was terrified that something had happened to me. I'm turning 23 this year, and it still gives me shivers. I remember feeling like I was going to throw up and had sinking feeling in my stomach. My mom held me close because she had worried sick all day. Needless to say, I stopped babysitting for that family right there, and then I had felt so awful for the wife because she was honestly one of the nicest people I had ever met.